Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Phil Panzarella. I'm the Chief Growth Officer for Easterseals, Maryland, DC, and Virginia. As someone who is very familiar with caregiving, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our candid conversations entitled Supporting Our Loved Ones, Navigating the Challenges of Being a Caregiver. As you can imagine, this is an important and timely topic. Bet you or someone you personally know is a caregiver today. Family caregivers now encompass more than 1 in 5 Americans, and recent studies by the National Alliance of Caregiving and AARP reveals that family caregivers are in worse health compared to 5 years ago. As the demand for caregiving increases with an aging population, COVID-19, and many other circumstances, there is an opportunity for the public and private sectors to work together to develop solutions to support family caregivers and those under their care. Today's webinar is made possible by our committed sponsor, UnitedHealthCare. Thank you for your wonderful support. As I introduce our esteemed panelists for today, I ask you to please take a few moments to answer these poll questions that will appear on your screen. We will share the results with you later in the presentation. So without further ado, let me introduce our esteemed panelists. Elizabeth Barnes, Senior Director of Adult and Senior Services for Easterseals, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. She has over 14 years of experience supporting people with disabilities. She is currently a board member of both the National Adult Services Association, the Maryland Association of Adult Day Services. Not only is she a leader in the field, she is passionate about enriching the lives of those she serves and providing holistic support in order for them to be active participants in their community. Locke is a director of the City Fund, an education reform nonprofit where she leads fundraising activities. She has significant experience in philanthropy and nonprofit management. She is a board member of Easterseals DMV and a devoted and loving mother to a 5-year-old son. Steve Schwab is the CEO of the Elizabeth Dole Foundation. Steve is a voice for the nation's 5.5 million military and veteran caregivers and their families. He has advised leaders in every sector and testified before Congress about the challenges facing America's military caregivers and how our nation can do more to support this community. CONWELL Smith was recently named Director of Operation Family Caregiver and Military Programs, as well as Senior Advisor for the Rosalynn Institute for Caregiving. She has over 25 years of experience in Washington, D.C., working on sweeping healthcare legislation, ranging from the Balanced Budget Act to the Patient's Bill of Rights to the Affordable Care Act. So for today's session, we will have an informal discussion with our wonderful panelists. So sit back, enjoy, relax, and take in the knowledge and wisdom from our panelists. Let's begin with a general question to all of the panelists. So I'm going to start off with Liz. Liz Barnes, if you could, please take a minute or so to describe some unique challenges of being a caregiver.
A few, huh? Well, I think some things that are very unique. I have to say, I'm a caregiver as myself. I take care of my mother who has probably mild to moderate dementia at this time. But some unique challenges are the fact that there's this internal obligation and responsibility that you always feel, even if you're tired, even if you're working, you may have children, that you have to continue to help and support and provide for somebody else. And I think that that is something that probably parents feel. Unfortunately, I'm not a parent yet, but I can only compare that to being possibly a parent, as well as also the fact that your needs are always taken care of last. It's one of those things where I forget to eat. Something as basic as eating. My stomach may say I'm hungry, but I don't take the time to go eat because other things need to be accomplished and completed. But those would probably be my top two that I'd say that are unique as a caregiver.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Liz. I appreciate it. Natalie, how about you? What's your thoughts?
100% agree with Liz. I think the hardest part for me being a parent is that your brain never turns off. There's never a moment of, okay, the day is done. Let me turn on the TV. and just chill. Because even if I'm doing that, I'm thinking, okay, if I'm doing this, that means the laundry isn't getting done. Have I got groceries? My son has gone through a crazy growth spurt. Does he have clothes that fit? All the way from that to how am I going to finish this work assignment while I'm taking care of my son? How do I make sure that I am, frankly, giving him the level of support and care that he needs when I'm beyond stressed out? It's a constant balancing act. And I think sometimes I'm so focused on getting the things done and making sure that the things are taken care of that not only do I neglect myself and my emotional care, but I also neglect the emotional care that he needs.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Steve, you handle military and the veteran community. What are you seeing in that space?
Yeah, Phil, it's been a trying year for all of us. There's probably not a person that's on the call today that hasn't felt stress or isolation in their own life during COVID-19. And on a normal non-pandemic day, which none of us have realized for quite some time, our nation's millions of military and veteran caregivers are stressed and feeling isolated. So you can imagine how much that's compounded when each of us are told we can't leave our homes. Most of them, the folks in military families, have really informal networks of support. And those informal networks of support have largely gone away almost entirely during this pandemic. So the neighbors, the friends, the loved ones, and other folks who would come informally to help military and veteran caregivers, they're on their own. So we've done a great deal of data, surveys, and research across the pandemic, and feelings of isolation, anxiety, depression are through the roof. Folks are doing what they can to do what we're doing right now, which is to stay connected with folks through great webinars like these Candid Conversations Easterseals is providing, but they also still need in-home support, which is why we've launched a respite program at EDF to provide boots on the ground in homes across America during this pandemic. It's why we're providing financial support, because folks are having a hard economic times, and they're not able to procure part-time flexible work because a lot of those jobs are disappearing with these hard economic times. So, Phil, families that are stretched on a good day are really, really stretched, and they're really, really hurting right now. And it's why it's so important that we're having the conversation that we're having today with my great colleagues and with Easterseals' help.
Steve, that's a wonderful point. I think that, there is a lot of stress going on with the implications of COVID. So CONWELL, as you think about that, given the stress that everyone's feeling for the caregivers, which is being exacerbated by COVID-19, what tips, resources, advice would you recommend to help reduce what appears to be burnout?
Well, I'll tell you, Phil, I'm blessed to work for an organization led by a former First Lady who used her global platform to focus on the plight of the caregiver. Our fearless leader, Rosalynn once said, there are only 4 kinds of people in this world: those who have been caregivers, those who are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need them. So her message really strikes at the heart of our entire community and defines our life in this time of COVID. As I think of the challenges for this vulnerable population, as all of us are nearing burnout, I realize that one of the most, or that many of the non-caregiving peers, they underestimate the level at which caregiving is really a 2-for-1 deal. It's the care recipient and the caregiver. And as I think about these challenges for this population, I realize that, one of the biggest challenges is making sure that we're planning, including them in each and every important decision is a must, and our health system doesn't always acknowledge this. So as I think through the burnout question, in October, RCI released a Caregivers in Crisis, a report on the impacts of COVID-19 on mental health and well-being of caregivers. In a survey of more than 400 caregivers from 46 states, the vast majority, 83%, reported increased stress related to caregiving since the start of the pandemic. Participants also reported, as Steve just mentioned, a decrease in help and support, increased isolation, concerns about financial instability, and a debilitating impact on their overall mental and physical health. So RCI has put forth some recommendations at this time, including increasing access to counseling and telehealth services, expanding caregiver workshops and coaching, connecting caregivers with peer support, expanding paid family leave, which I think there's a big push in the efforts in Congress right now to at least target that for those that are dealing with COVID caregiving responsibilities. So I think there's a lot that can be done. But more than anything, the caregivers out there need to exercise self-care. They need to try to acknowledge those points, and they're different for every caregiver, those points that add that exacerbated stress in their lives. And they need to be laser focused on trying to address those concerns. We really have to highlight self-care at every single point of this discussion.
No, that's wonderful. Some great tips there, CONWELL. I appreciate that. So, let me just kind of expand upon that a little bit. You mentioned resources and things of that nature. So Liz, let me go back to you. If one is in need of caregiver support and needs kind of help, where do they turn? What do they look for? Where do they go to find that kind of help?
Sure. So I think that I'm going to speak to a little bit pre-COVID, because I want to be optimistic and say we will persevere and get out of this and kind of go back to what our former normal was, and say that, a lot of local governments and nonprofits have a lot of different caregiver support, AARP, Alzheimer's Association. So if we're talking about the adults with disabilities or senior space, that's kind of some larger resources. Right now during COVID, Montgomery County has this wonderful, and I know a lot of other local governments do as well, have a wonderful page that's kind of connected to caregivers as also their Department of Recreation, where they can offer a whole bunch of opportunities that are free, different series and libraries of activities and engagement that's done virtually. I will say that in the senior space in particular, that's definitely challenging. Technology during this time has been a significant challenge. They are of the generation where they never grew up with technology. So having somebody who may have a dementia or cognitive decline, it's very challenging right now. And, Steve mentioned this about the isolation, that it's really sad right now, because there's, on one hand, we want to keep all of our folks safe, but we're having this delta where it's detrimental at the same token, but nobody wants to open their doors and let people resume regular lives. So it's this balancing act and trying to figure out and listen to what's going on in the news, which would be probably a tip for caregivers as well, is take a break. It's okay to take a break from the news. It's this repetitive cycle over and over. Again, to CONWELL's point, self-care. Make sure you do that telehealth appointment, not just for whoever you're taking care of, but also for yourself. That's I guess the positive thing that's about telehealth. It's you can do it from the safety of your own home now. Get your medications delivered. Don't go out to the pharmacy. So a lot of the resources out there may be with a former or current provider that's also providing services, whether or not it be home health, whether or not it be a respite service. Additionally, it could be a former, like us, adult medical day service, where we're providing continual care even through the pandemic, even though we're not traditionally delivering our services in a facility-based program.
Wonderful points, Liz. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So, Mally, I want to go to you as a primary caregiver of a young child and a full-time working mother. Can you speak about your experience and how do you balance all this with burnout and self-care and all the other things that were just mentioned?
First and foremost, I have to say that I am a very, very fortunate person. I live less than a mile away from my mother and my sister. And then I have another sister who lives about 15, 20 minutes away. Before COVID, I worked really, really long hours outside of the home. I had someone come, I had a pickup nanny who would pick up my son, prepare dinner, put him to bed. obviously that was no longer possible. And as my sister and I actually moved into my mom's house for a little while with my son, because my sister was in the same boat and we were trying to just help each other out. However, I came across a really difficult point. I didn't realize how stressed and how much anxiety I had. We were still trying to sort of jury rig everything because we thought that COVID was just going to be a couple of months, and then it kept going, and it was just not sustainable. I actually had a pretty severe panic attack while I was driving with my son. And it was thank God, no one was hurt, but it was a huge wake up call. I called my sister and I was in hysterics, and she was like, "You aren't okay. You need to take a break." And I did. At that point, my son had not eaten for 3 days because he was so stressed as well. And so it forced me to realize, what am I doing? The only thing that matters here is my son's health and mine. As much as I do need to work to make sure we have a roof over our heads, it's not going to be worth it if he's not eating. And I'm so stressed that I'm having dangerous panic attacks. So I was able to I took a week off. I just called my boss and I said, I have to take a mental health break. And I took a week off of work. Within a couple of days, my son was better. I was better. And again, I'm very fortunate that I have my sister, I have my mom, I can turn to them. I am, as of the beginning of September, my son has been in a learning pod. So at least I have that support as well. It's still really hard. I'm paying as much for childcare now as I was paying when he was a toddler. It's also not sustainable, but I also recognize that I'm far more fortunate to be able to do that than many, many other people. So I ask for help too. I'm shameless in asking for help from my siblings and from others. And that's the only way I've been able to get through this.
Well, thanks, Mally. I know that's really, really difficult situation. So Steve, let me go back to you. I mean, are these challenges that we're hearing now any different in the military veteran community? Are they facing the same kinds of challenges? And do they have the same kinds of resources potentially available to them?
I want to start by piggybacking on something Mally just said, which is so important, asking for help. Mally, I'm so glad that you asked for help because probably the most important message we can give to every single caregiver that's tuning in today is to do exactly the same thing when you need it. Caregivers are incredibly reluctant to ask for help. Military and veteran caregivers, distinctly so, come from proud military families who, when they're trained to go to the battlefield, are trained to be, independent, of course, to work with the folks in their platoon. But this stuff can get drilled in one's head, and it can feel like it's weak to ask for help. It is perhaps the strongest thing that an individual can do in admitting that they need help. I was on the phone with a friend of mine who's a therapist. Phil, to your question, I think context is a little bit important. America is having a mental health crisis right now. Me and probably all the folks on this phone have had mental and emotional ups and downs all throughout this pandemic. I had a really bad night's sleep last night, which contributed to me having a really bad morning, getting ready for this amazing webinar. And I'm just being honest about that because we're living in a world that none of us prepared for. Caregivers live in a world largely that they weren't prepared for. Military and veteran caregivers, largely on a moment's notice, find out that they're going to be caring for a loved one, in some cases that's become like a second, third, or fourth child with debilitating conditions that happen on multiple levels over multiple years. And the stress and anxiety that military and veteran caregivers face is usually 4 to 5 times more than their civilian counterparts. And so, my message to all of those listening, civilian or military or veteran caregiver, doesn't matter who you are or where you are. If you need help, you need to let the organizations on this call know. You need to reach out to us. If we can't help you, we're going to help you link to organizations who can. You are not in this battle alone. And that's especially the truth during this pandemic where, I'm not in an active caregiving role and I can feel like I'm by myself. And so I'm making extra time, making extra effort to stay in touch with my family members and loved ones. And that's just really so important, especially as we're in this holiday season. So help is out there. It's strong and strengthening to admit one needs help. And whether you're a military and veteran or civilian caregiver, we're going to make sure organizations like ours, and I know those are on the phone, are going to make sure you need the help or you get the help that you need. Phil, I think you're muted there.
You know how many times I've talked to myself, Steve, in the last probably 6 months is probably quite a few. So anyway, I just wanted to say, those are excellent points. I mean, especially in the military, you're taught to be strong. No one really is less concerned about your emotions than mission accomplishment. So being able to share that is really, really powerful. So as you think about that, I'm struggling with what are the early signs of somebody is being stressed out and starting to feel that. I mean, we as leaders in our organizations in the community, what are those signs? CONWELL, and I know this is really not a specific question based upon your background, but obviously as a leader in the community, what are the signs that you see when people are starting to get stressed out?
I think the first sign is that they don't take care of themselves. I think that is the very first sign. When you start missing those doctor's appointments as a caregiver for yourself, when you don't go to the dentist, when you cease responding to calls and outreach of your friends, not because they're not important to you, but because you're exhausted. I think that there are all of these things are a universal experience. I'm a huge Maya Angelou fan, always was. And she had this whole idea of the human condition. What hurts you hurts me. And I think we would do well to remember that none of us are superheroes. All of us have a vulnerability. And we're all going to present, as Steve kind of indicated a minute ago, we're all going to present in fairly similar ways. Finding those creative ways to take both a physical and mental break in this virtual world is absolutely key, especially at a time when help or respite options are limited. And so, be there for your family members, be there for your friends, try to allow people that space, and don't underestimate the power of these breaks, no matter how small or infrequent. If we take these breaks intentionally, we can find those moments to organize our thoughts, think through our needs, and act on them. If you don't take the time, you cannot do it. You're running in a world of overwhelm. And so that will just continue to drain us. And we need to see the caregivers in our lives too. I think caregivers are too often in the shadows. COVID has really brought them out of the shadows, which I find very exciting, because when I think about a future of public policy and ways in which we can have new organizations that complement all the good work at Easterseals or Elizabeth Dole or any of our organizations. I just think that we're in an exciting time, but the first thing we must do is recognize the caregiver. We have to see them. If we're going to provide help to our sisters, our brothers, our mothers, our friends that are going through this type of strife with their family members, then we have to be very intentional about knowing that they're there and trying to know what they're going through. I really appreciated something Steve said a moment ago with, I'm working with Operation Family Caregiver, and we have such complementary services to the Elizabeth Dole Foundation. But I am also the spouse to a disabled veteran, and he is a proud son of a gun army man, I'll tell you that much. And so drawing out of him his stresses and concerns is it's a daily occurrence in our household. And I expect it because I know that there's this pride. Pride does not only exist in the military, it exists in each and every one of us at some point or another. And so we need to understand when those that are related to us, that are our friends, that are caregivers or care recipients, are hiding their needs. We need to try to draw those out.
Phil is
That's
on mute
wonderful.
again.
Yeah, that's wonderful, CONWELL. I appreciate those comments. I mean, I think, we all too often we take that population for granted. I know that I have a 95-year-old mother-in-law who lives with me. I have a 95-year-old mom who has dementia in New Jersey. I watched my parents, take care of my grandfather who lived to be 105, and we take that for granted. At times it's like, it's really hard to recognize what they're going through, but I think we all are in that mode right now, have to be totally cognizant of that. So with that in mind, Liz, how, as someone who manages senior and adult day centers, how do you make sure that you take that into consideration and you're monitoring management and see those signs so that we can take care of those caregivers?
So we're actually doing, something that is exciting because caregivers have been at the forefront of our mindset. And, the reason why adult medical day for Easterseals in particular is so important is because we have, when we are open and facility based, this nice long extended day where we could support the caregiver. And not only if they want to use it as respite, but also support them in the workforce if they are still working. We have a lot of folks that are also in that sandwich generation that are adult children taking care of their parents, and then they have children themselves. So, being able to have those extended hours was really helpful when we were in the facility. Now that we're not, it is interesting because we put out a survey that said, what can we do for you? We want to know about your needs. We want to open those lines of communication. We think they're very important. And the number one answer that we got back was, we want you to be open again. We want you to be able to provide supports to our loved ones. Our loved ones are declining. They're declining because they are out of their routine. They're, out of going to socialize, to get the medical supports that they need. We don't necessarily feel comfortable in taking our loved ones to the doctors anymore. So they do telehealth, but telehealth is only so good sometimes. Sometimes you actually need to see somebody, and I say a 3D person, to be able to really assess somebody for their needs and what they need. And also our generations, for the most part, that are in our centers are used to a 3D social interaction. They're not used to even sometimes phone calls and having long conversations on the phone. That's not going to really fulfill that one little thing inside of you that has that, human connection to other people. For some, probably in newer generations, even though we're still, figuring out the virtual world, is, at least that kind of puts a Band-Aid over some things. But for the generations that we serve, it doesn't. And so with the caregivers, they're struggling even more, trying to figure out what activities, what can they do with their loved ones at home. And so for us, we've actually pivoted during COVID to providing a daily care call. And that is something that we do on an ongoing basis, just to have connection with our participant and the caregivers. And then outside of that, we're also we've done a combination of things. We've dropped off and delivered activity boxes with already pre-planned activities for our schedules, so that when they hop on a Zoom, they have all the supplies ready to go. The caregivers don't have to get anything for them. They can just go in their activity box and get out all the supplies that they need for that day's activity. Because this is such an important month and we're talking and highlighting caregivers, we are actually doing a caregiver appreciation in a way on Saturday to help them get away from, the day-to-day that seems to all meld into one day, which is going to be this Saturday. And we are going to be doing a lot of mindfulness and meditation, and being able to decompress and kind of just mentally escape. Even if it's just for the 20 minutes that we're offering, they can get away. And also be able to express and ask questions, because I think that asking for help, absolutely, as Steve shared. I think that with CONWELL, which is, definitely being able to, ask for help, not only, but asking for help, but then in addition to being able to feel connected, being able to have communication. And communication sometimes, again, is not in a traditional sense now. So we're trying to make the best that we can during this time. So I think that in anything, this is what we're trying to offer. We're trying to be creative and innovative and kind of launch off from here to go into new other platforms that we can. We thought about doing other parallel activity schedules for caregivers, but we also need to see the need. And we also want to respect that it takes time to sit down at a computer and to, want to engage in an activity that somebody is offering. So if it's just that 30-second phone call to check in on somebody that may be in your network or that is a friend, I still encourage folks to have that network and to be strong with being able to make sure that they are able to support one another during this time.
Thank you, Liz. I appreciate that. And for our folks in the audience and attendees, if you have a question that you would like to ask one of the panelists, please go to the Q&A and ask the question. We'd be glad to be able to respond to you, and if not during the session, at least after the session. So I know there's probably a lot of issues, a lot of questions that you might have, so please don't hesitate to ask those questions. So Mally, I want to go back to you as a parent and a caregiver. What services outside of your immediate family have you leveraged in order to help you get through some of these very challenging times? Do you mind sharing that with us?
Absolutely. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I, like many other parents, just tried to find, there were virtual classes. I, got boxes of things that the kids could work on and, build, just to keep him entertained and busy, frankly, while I was trying to work still, a pretty demanding job. Those wore off pretty quickly. He's only 5. For older kids, those might have been more successful, but for a 5-year-old, all he wants is parents. And so for a very long time, though, it was just sort of passing him around to different, to my siblings while, and going back and forth and trying to organize my day so that let's say every hour and a half or so, I could really focus on him for like 30 to 45 minutes and then go back and then do some work at night after he went to bed. But outside of the home, so, virtual classes, virtual, engagements, virtual story time. So at least he was hearing a different voice other than mine. We also, like I said, we actually were fortunate, my sister and I, we were able to get an au pair. So we currently use an au pair and split her. She mostly works with my nephew who just turned a year old, but she also helps with my son a couple hours a day, which is huge. And then also this learning pod that we became a part of in September. Again, I'm very fortunate to be able to take advantage of all of these different things. But I would even say that joining different meal services and just having one less thing to think about in terms of preparing meals. I joined Facebook groups aplenty for parents who are also struggling. There is, those sorts of things just give you opportunities to, even if it's just to vent, it's good to know that there's other people, and then there's other ideas out there about how to help take care of your kid during this time. So those are just some of them.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, venting, it seems like I've been doing a little bit of that lately myself, right? So it's, that has to go back to Steve's point, right? Sometimes, this whole idea of stress and burnout affects us all. And we talk about work-life balance, and I find that working at home, it's like you got to figure out how to integrate it. There's no balance. It's like you just got to figure out how to make it work. And
I'm going to interject here, Phil. I think first of all, work-life balance is a fallacy, and I really resent the fact that that has been something that is talked about, because we are expected to, in this pandemic, many of us are expected to produce and be as quote unquote productive as if nothing has changed, but everything has changed. We're all under this mental trauma, frankly. Certainly it's just hard to be at home, but it's also like, I miss my family. I haven't seen my brother in a year. I haven't seen my niece in a year. My mom is 82 and she's actually listening in. Thankfully, she has, her brain is sharp, but she's physically challenged. So, my other sister and I are trying to balance out helping to take care of her and get her to her appointments. So, there's a lot. So we can't just pretend that people don't have these huge responsibilities that intervene with our being quote unquote productive at work.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, so Mally, what's your mom's name? Well, you're on.
Sorry, her name is Joy.
Joy, how are you? Say it. Your daughter's doing wonderful. So thank you for being here and listening to us. And we appreciate you. I had to say that. Sorry.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome. So Steve, this whole idea of all these challenges, obviously a lot of mental stress and behavioral health types of challenges. I know we here at Easterseals have a behavioral health clinic, and we've seen some spikes, almost 30% in the need. What are you seeing in that space, and what are the resources out there to kind of address and deal with some of these from your perspective?
Oh, that's a great question. Organizations like ours, Rosalynn, Carter, and others have been, staying a step ahead with respect to staying in touch with our supporters, the families that we serve. And what we saw out of the gate with the pandemic was a total sea change in how these families are accessing care. There was a reluctance generally on the part of military families to access telehealth, especially from a therapeutic and emotional standpoint. That has changed completely. Folks are now embracing the ability to connect with teletherapy. A lot of therapists are actually closing down their physical offices and going 100% virtual, which actually can allow folks in a caregiving situation to access mental and emotional therapy and healthcare a little bit easier. I'm here to tell you it works. Therapists are blazing new trails when it comes to offering these services online. We're going to be in partnership with Wounded Warrior Project in 2021, diving in deeply to better understand the tangible mental and emotional healthcare needs of caregivers as a result of the pandemic. We did a great deal of work with partners at Philips, which is one of the largest healthcare companies in the world. Over a 2-year period, Easterseals was involved, Rosalynn, Carter, and others, to help us define the military and veteran caregiver journey. And it's really time to take another look at that, especially from a mental and emotional healthcare standpoint, and educate our partners, educate new leaders in the administration and Congress, state leaders, governors, on the acute, urgent, and serious mental and emotional healthcare needs of caregivers. Our first priority is to get as many caregivers as we can into a structured peer support environment. Molly talked about the various Facebook groups that she's a part of. Organizations like EDF, the Red Cross, Rosalynn, Carter, and others have structured online environments that provide mental and emotional health care. We have experts at EDF that can provide mental and emotional health interventions online as folks find an environment that can embrace their daily stresses and their ups and downs. And so that's a really, really important part, is to get folks to, one, admit they need help, and two, is to get them into an environment where they can find peers, resources, and support. I would also suggest that folks avail themselves of the respite care and support that we have available at EDF. Go to hiddenheroes.org/respite. You can put an application in today. I can almost guarantee you that if you're an eligible military and veteran caregiver and you need help at home, we can provide you boots on the ground. And we can do it in a safe way. We can do it in a COVID-friendly way. Folks were a little worried about having assistance in the home. And these are trained providers that are managed by CareLinks, one of the best care provision companies in the country. These are professionals who can provide in-home help that gives caregivers an opportunity to take a step back and take a break. It's hard to disconnect entirely right now. It's super hard if you're a caregiver. But the stories that we're hearing from folks who have welcomed these respite workers into their house are mind-blowing. Just seeing the testimonies and the testimonials that have come from folks, to having someone who can clean up or prepare some meals or allow you to take a walk. We can give you lots of hours that you can use over a long period of time in order to do that. It goes back to what I think CONWELL said really importantly at the top of the program, which is self-help is so important. Finding time in your calendar, being proactive to manage your ability to do yoga or to partake in programs like C3 that we've recently launched at the foundation, which is a weekly interactive program that's promoting self-help and mental and emotional health care. There are organizations and programs out there to help you. You just really need to take the time and proactively plan to give yourself the breathing room to do it. So Phil, it was a long answer. The last thing that I'll say on this topic is that we're really optimistic with this new administration coming in. No one can deny it. The Electoral College vote was official yesterday. We have a new president-elect who has a very serious caregiving platform and is engaging, groups like all of those on this webinar today to really think through how we systemically develop support across government, the national level, at the state level, at the local level, to support this population that has been largely hidden from America's consciousness. And I'll end again with CONWELL. Their visionary leader, former First Lady Rosalynn Carter, said it right. CONWELL quoted her, "If you aren't a caregiver now, you will be. If you are one, you got to raise your hand and ask for support." Every single American will be impacted by caregiving at one point in their lives. Directly, most likely, indirectly for sure. So it's important for all of us to know and recognize how we can support our family members and ourselves through the journey.
Phil,
Steve,
do you
that was
mind if
wonderful.
I
Thank
add
you
to
for
that?
Yeah, so CONWELL, I was just going to say that if you could talk about, the caregiver plans and how you support this, because I'm sure that the mental health area is something that you're well envisioned and understand as well. So please share your thoughts. I would welcome it.
Well, I feel like probably because we're operating in the military space a bit, I feel like Steve and I could be a roadshow. But it's a very unique it's a unique group of people in a wonderful way. But as I was thinking about this, Phil, a moment ago, you said something that really jumped out at me, and Steve spoke to it too, and so is Molly, and so is Liz. The idea that this is a group that's taken for granted. Isn't it interesting that every single family goes through this? Isn't it interesting that we are all going to be on the receiving end or the giving end or the supporting end, but we're going to have some relationship to caregiving in the span of our lives. And yet it's a voice that has been really largely underserved. One of the caregivers that we serve said this about COVID, quote, "The rest of the world now can see what I have to go through daily to keep my family safe, and they understand the fear I feel every time I step out my door." How powerful is that? How powerful is that this is this invisible population and a veil is kind of being lifted? I spoke a little while ago about RCI coming out with in October, the Caregivers in Crisis report, and just what it demonstrated about the stress on the mental health of the caregivers. But building on that urgency, we just released also Recalibrating for Caregivers. And that was a follow-up report that analyzes shifting demographics, economic impact, and caregiver health data. COVID really highlights the need for breaking down all of these silos across healthcare, government, business, to create an infrastructure that better supports caregivers, and not just the aged caregivers, not just the military caregivers, but really crossing those cultural divides. We're really learning that some people don't even identify themselves as caregivers. They are doing all of those items, but they think to themselves, I'm just being a daughter, or I'm just being a spouse. And we especially see this in certain cultural divides, and also that are very familial, where the whole family just pitches in. They don't see themselves as caregivers. They see it as a cultural responsibility. And then, of course, we have the gender divide, where a lot of men are taking care of their family, but maybe it's that pride, maybe, I'm not sure what it is, but they just see caregiver as almost like this soft word. It is anything but. And I want to tell any caregiver that is on this webinar today, you have to be one of the strongest people I know, plain and simple. I think there are a few things in our life that show what we're made of than making that voluntary decision to care for somebody else at great expense to ourselves, but also at great joy. You know, it is really a bucket of the most extreme emotion. So you have anger, you have frustration, you have love, you have sadness, all of this in one sort of in a cauldron of activity. And so I want us to bring pride to that, and I want us to really recognize each other and all pull each other up and make policymakers and everyone out there see us. Because I think from a healthcare system standpoint, if we don't take this preventive and public health approach to what I would call a caregiving crisis, we're not going to cross those silos, and we're not going to do the research to find out what we currently don't know about this huge population. So I encourage us to really ask the questions that we don't know the answers to yet.
I'm gonna jump in and piggyback off of CONWELL, because yes, I say this a million times a day. I'm incredibly fortunate. Taking care of a child as a single parent is hard, but I'm, again, very fortunate. My mother, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think that she feels sometimes like a burden, and she sometimes says that. And meanwhile, I feel so grateful that my son and my nephew and I get to live and be so close to her. You know, throughout the pandemic, she's been baking bread for my son, who was eating toast 24 hours a day. And again, it's such a privilege. And I think, CONWELL, that was really nice, that we need to recognize that it's hard, but there's joy and fulfillment in it too. It's not always like a burden that you're bearing. And as you said, there are cultural things. Like in our family, there was no way that we weren't going to be stepping up to take care of her and help take care of her. But I know in other families, that's not the case. Even thinking forward about like myself, I have now put in structures in place to think about long-term care insurance, because that was something that I realized, oh, wow, if something were to happen to me and it was really serious, my family would potentially go bankrupt having to take care of me, or give up their livelihood and their jobs. And so those were sorts of things that I started thinking about for myself proactively, so that, as I live and as my son lives, those are structures that I have in place for my own care in the future. So just one note about that. One more thing, I think caregiving has mostly fallen, in terms of parenting, has fallen on women. And so we work, and we're primary caregivers in the home. Melinda Gates actually just did an op-ed about the caregiving crisis. CONWELL, you also mentioned it. What we are doing is, again, it's not sustainable, and we need to figure out a way that we can really integrate caregiving is not separate from us, it's part of us. So how do we include it in our full day? And how do we get others to respect that this is part of a full day and part of us as, people?
So Mally, thank you very much for sharing that. I mean, this is a wonderful conversation, and I'm going to piggyback. When we come back to this conversation, Liz, I would like to get a real positive, joyous story about some of the wonderful things that are being done to help people in need in the senior community. But before we do that, we do have the poll results that I want to share with you. So if we could just take a minute, you can see the poll results, if we can have them posted.
Wow.
So you can see, are you or a loved one currently a caregiver? Obviously 47% is yes, primary, and then secondary 18. So it's pretty significant. On a scale of 1 to 5, which one is, 1 being the least, how much stress and burden are you currently experiencing? So 39% of us, are experiencing some pretty significant stress. So, it's impacting all of us in some shape, fashion, or form. And then the third question is, what are your most pressing challenges as a caregiver? I mean, this is pretty balanced across the board, but 51% says limitation and fears. I mean, it's probably limitations and fears of what you don't know, right? We're dealing with things for the first time. And then there's limitations because you don't know where to maybe necessarily go get those resources. Communication and behavioral changes, and you can see isolation and lack of support. So, one of the things I share with my management team is that, don't assume people are okay. Just because they are at home, it doesn't mean they are okay. You have to check in. Sometimes home may be the cause of some of the challenges and angst that they have, right? So don't assume. So I just had to share those results with you about the poll so you can see that, how all of us are being impacted. So I want to thank the team for pulling that together. So Liz, can I come back to you? Can you share a positive story with us about some joy and happiness that's happened as a result of all the wonderful work that folks like you and your team and all the folks on this Zoom call are all being participants in?
Sure. Phil, before I do that, I actually want to piggyback on what Molly said about, just in general, the fact that folks, I think, are in general very fortunate. I think that there is joy in caregiving, but there also are plenty of resources out there, especially when it comes down to being proactive, as she shared. And that's really, to me, important as somebody who works in this space, is to also provide some education and some resources for the families to be able to say, hey, as caregivers, you see things from a different perspective, whether or not it's now or later on and in what capacity. But ultimately, having a POA, advanced directives, there's a lot of resources now just to put these things in place, because when you're thinking about what's going to happen in the next generation, or if and when, we don't know when we may be a recipient of needing services. So I think that's one of the things that I would highlight, as much as, again, it takes time, it takes energy, but I think that there's a lot of value in being able to be proactive about being able to organize things in the future. And as well as also, there's a lot of financial support out there for these different things. A lot of these things are even free. It's just really connecting and accessing them and putting a plan in place and talking to family members, or talking to your network of friends, or whoever you have as your support group or network, to be able to share what your thoughts are about these things. Something similar that I did most recently through Montgomery County and Jessa was, I did my advanced directive. I would have never thought that at my age I would be doing an advanced directive and talking to my husband about being, my decision maker. But we had that tough conversation. Sometimes it's not easy, but for me, I needed to have a plan in place because I am a caregiver myself. What happens because I have not taken care of myself? Something does happen to me. I need a solid plan to be able to roll over to somebody else and to communicate all of that, and to be able to have something where everything's located, where all the important things are, where the medication lists are, who the doctors are, all of that in place. And I think that's something that, and that's just, one example, but it can happen on a very large scale and be applied to a lot of different situations. So now I'll switch gears over to a joyous story. We have several. I think that, COVID has been really, really challenging, and we've seen a significant decline in a lot of our participants. And we've actually, which is, unfortunate, we've actually lost 20% of our folks. So 20% of our participants in the adult day have either had different situations. They've passed away to un-COVID related situations. They've changed their level of care, which means that they are no longer appropriate for our level of care, but may have gone to a nursing home or hospice, and or they've moved out of the area. And that's due to being closer to their caregivers who are not local anymore. And so they've been pulled out of the program for various reasons. However, during this time, I kind of shared a little bit about what we're doing. We have a lot of folks that live in either a group home or a congregate setting, group home, assisted living. And it's been really challenging for a lot of those providers. They're battling not only their staff that are coming in and out of their homes, but they're also, responsible for 24/7, 365, supporting all of the residents in their homes. And I think one of the most amazing things, and this is on a very large scale for Easterseals and what we've been able to do in the adult day service space, is the fact that we've been able to provide all of these activities that are helping prevent people from declining further. We are able to provide nursing support. All of our medical support is still being done, but it's being done either via Zoom or over the phone. So if somebody has, for instance, diabetes and usually has high blood pressure, we're trying to regulate that, but we really regulate it at the center. How do we best do that in the homes? And I think that, us being able to do all that we can with all of our nursing team and all of our wonderful RNs to be able to have those conversations and make those connections and support the caregivers and educate them on the best ways to support their loved ones that we do in the center, but apply it in home, has probably been the most joyous thing. Even though it's very reality based, I think that's one of the things, is that we're actually being able to preserve our folks as best as we can under these circumstances. And it's been through a different avenues, whether or not it's activities, it's medical support, it's food. We do food delivery, so we're able to see them. We do drive-by parades with all of our Easterseals buses, so people have a resemblance of normalcy because they're used to seeing our buses, and being able to, say hi from afar. We did in Hagerstown. We were able to do a wonderful drive-by, and we all dressed up and gave out all of our fruits and vegetables. So it was an amazing time, because it also brought the ADS team together and in this trying time. So those are just a couple of things, but that really is our joyous thing, that we're able to support folks as best as we can as we're learning through this.
So that's wonderful, Liz. So I appreciate it. So, there's many organizations that are doing wonderful, wonderful things during this time of need, and we can't thank them enough, whether you're Easterseals or not, and you're making a difference and impacting the community. So we thank them for it. There was one question that came up, and Steve, I have to ask you, because there is a question about, how do I make sure my military veteran, person I'm taking care of, how do I know what benefits they're able to participate in or take advantage of, or where do I go get that advice?
Yeah, Phil, thanks for bringing up this question. This is probably the most popular question we get, because a lot of folks that are caring for an elderly family member may be disconnected from their service for decades. Maybe that person also wasn't inside the VA system for their healthcare. So the answer is, have them contact us. We will put them in touch with one of the big veterans organizations that does benefit services, the Legion, VFW, Vietnam Veterans of America. They are really super adept at helping veterans explore what they're eligible for. We also connect these families directly with good friends and partners at the VA. I would just say, to those of you who have any reluctance at all, the VA system is an incredibly effective, well-regarded, upwards of 90% of people who are actually served by the system love it. Sometimes it can be arduous getting in it, and it can be complicated, but groups like ours can help you get inside the system. Once you're in, it's really, really terrific care, and we can help any of these families that have questions about benefits get the information they need through us and our partners.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. So we're running out of time, so I want to go around the room here. 30 seconds. What words of wisdom would you give to our attendees during this COVID time and how to address it? CONWELL, can we start with you, please?
Happy to. Ask for help. Focus on your own shortcomings, because you're human. We all have them. and try to get help in that space. That is the way to maximize the impact of the help that you're receiving. Reach out to Rosalynn Carter Institute for Caregivers, reach out to Easterseals, reach out to Elizabeth Dole Foundation, but ask for help. And also see those around you, see the caregivers around you, thank them, try to support them. There are many ways to do so. You could just order groceries, but just try to support those caregivers that are in your lives.
Thank you, CONWELL. Liz?
I would say you're not in this alone. It's an amazing situation on how many people in our nation are caregivers and or have been touched, just as both Steve and CONWELL had shared. And that should, I hope, make everybody feel a little bit more comfortable in being able to share what they need support in and how we can help. There's a lot of organizations out there that are here for you, as well as also, I think, to take a step back and a deep breath is also very helpful. And to also make memories. This is a time also when we're going to remember this time, and it would be great if we're going to be able to put a positive spin on it and remember some wonderful times with our loved ones.
Perfect, Liz. Thank you. Mally?
To CONWELL's, double down on CONWELL's point, ask for help. It's sometimes hard, it's humbling, but ask for help, talk to people, take yourself for a walk, go for a run. You getting so stressed that you can't do the care that you need to do defeats the whole purpose. So really try to take those pauses. I know it's really, really, really hard. And for some people, those options are limited, but if you can, try to take those pauses, try to take a step back, get mental health, speak to people, ask for help.
Thank you, Mally. Steve, last but not least.
Oh, thanks. I'll just say be proud of who you are. Be proud to identify yourself as a caregiver. Wear it on your heart, wear it on your sleeve, wear it on your chest. Let your neighbors, friends, and family members know, let America know. We're proud of you. We want to help you. Caregivers are the strongest, most resilient, most positive Americans I've ever met. So be proud to wear it, and wear it often and everywhere you go. And happy holidays.
Thank you, Steve. So I just want to summarize by saying, at the end of the day, share your emotions. It's okay. We're all going through the same pain. Trust your emotions and share them and ask for help. And one thing is, hopefully during this 1 hour session, I know we covered a lot of ground. Hopefully we planted some seeds, gave you some ideas, pointed you to some resources to help you navigate through this challenging and unprecedented time. One thing you should remember, that there are organizations like all of us here that are out there to create hopeful, inclusive communities where all people achieve their potential to live meaningful lives. If you want to help or volunteer, touch any one of these different organizations or reach out to Easterseals at www.eseal.org. Can't thank you enough for your participation. Thank you for all our wonderful panelists. And Steve, to your point, have a happy holiday and Merry Christmas to all of you out there. Enjoy life. Thank you.
Thanks, Easterseals.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.